everybody, and welcome to the Feminine Principle Podcast, Astrology for Authentic Living. My name is Mel with Energetic Principles.
And I'm Shawna with Neo Feminine Astrology.
And in this episode, we will be discussing the astrology for the week of July 31st, and what we have titled, The Power of Unconscious Patterns. The purpose of this podcast is to give inspiration and guidance for this week with real-life examples of what to expect.
And the three major aspects that we'll talk about today are Uranus stationing retrograde, which we're calling inner revolutions. We'll also talk about Jupiter square Pluto, which is a biggie. We're deeming it expanding your personal power. And lastly, we'll talk about the full moon and lunar eclipse in Aquarius, which we're calling release and reset.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So we're really excited to share some guidance regarding these transits with you. And as always, we encourage you to remember that some of these transits will influence you more than others based on your personal birth chart and just what's happening in your life right now. So we encourage you to notice what resonates the most, take what you like, and always use your intuition and logic to decide what's best for you.
Yes, absolutely, because you know you best. So let's kick off this week's episode with a quick rundown of the moon's path through the zodiac and some other minor aspects for you astro geeks out there. So our lunar lady is going to kick off the week in intense Scorpio before she makes her way to the adventure-driven Sagittarius on Tuesday. She then continues the waxing cycle where she'll move into practical Capricorn on Thursday, which will be early Friday for some, depending on where you are in the world. And then she's going to wrap up the week by moving into the innovative sign of Aquarius on Sunday, all the while heading towards the apex of her full moon lunar eclipse, which we will discuss in much greater detail later in this episode. Also of note is Venus, who's going to be moving into the watery depths of Cancer on Monday, July 31st. She is moving out of Gemini and on her way to the Crab. And then just a quick reminder that Mercury is currently in that retrograde shadow period of early Virgo that we made mention of last week. So just know that Mercury is going to retrograde August 12th through September 5th from Virgo back into Leo. So make sure your calendars are marked. So that being said, let's start with our first transit here, and it's a kind of a transit. It's its own thing in itself, and it's very important in astrology, and that is when a planet stations retrograde or direct. And we are going to be talking about Uranus, who's going to be stationing retrograde, and what we are deeming inner revolutions. And Uranus is going to station retrograde on Wednesday, August 2nd at 10:31 p.m. Pacific time, which is Thursday, August 3rd at 5:31 a.m. Universal Time and 3:31 p.m. Aussie Eastern Time. And that is going to happen at 28 degrees of Aries. So Shawna, kick us in with your quote for Uranus stationing retrograde.
Yes. So this quote is by Dorothy Day, the American journalist and social activist. She says, "The greatest challenge of the day is how to bring about a revolution of the heart, a revolution which has to start with each one of us." And so I chose this quote in particular for Uranus stationing retrograde because Uranus, the planet, is all about revolution. It's about change. It's about breaking down old systems so that something new and innovative can be put into place. And when Uranus stations retrograde, it is an internalizing of this process. So whereas we may typically be striving towards this reinvention and on a day-to-day basis, more externally trying to reinvent the external things and aspects of our life, now over the next many months, that process of revolution, it's inverted, it's turned inward. And so this this doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to stop happening on the outside, but it encourages us to look at how we can change things on the inside in order to create change on the outside. So that's why I really love this quote, because she talks about just that. She talks about a revolution starting individually, which to me is on the inside. So like at a political scale, at a collective scale, it starts at an individual level. And then within each person's life, it starts in the heart. It starts on the inside and then ripples out to your physical world.
Yes. And we are talking about Uranus and Aries here. So talk about individual and and working on ourselves. Absolutely. Because we have been working on ourselves for so long. I mean, we are wrapping up this Uranus Aries transit for the most part, because it's going to move into Taurus in March of next year. But this has been a long process that we've been going through the last 7 years or so. Where we have been renovating our own individual character and our personalities, in a sense, in different areas of our lives, depending on where Uranus is actually sitting in your chart during the transit. But yeah, I agree with Shawna with, because I really feel like the biggest changes in life happen internally. Like even when something happens on the outside of us, because when Uranus is when Uranus is direct, a lot of the change that's happening is kind of outside things that kind of come out of the blue, and you're confronted with these certain circumstances that are like, where did this come from? And now I have to what's going on? But the real crisis essentially happens internally, like regardless of the circumstance that's happening on the outside. The real change comes from that internal processing, that, leads us to the truth of what it is that we need to change. And so with Uranus going retrograde, and especially since it's really at the tail end, this is the last retrograde before it leaves Aries, right, Shawna? This is
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So this is our last hurrah with going in and, really making those inner changes, that need to be made so that we can essentially wrap up this whole, Uranus transit in Aries. It's been direct since, late last year. I believe it's December 29th. Maybe you can look at in your life in the last, about 8 months, where all these outside things have changed for you, and new considerations and new insights have come your way externally. And now we get to process all that and really understand, what has happened to us, what changes we have incurred. And now we can integrate all that change on an internal level, for Shawna and I were saying, for an inner revolution of sorts. I think it's, I'm intrigued by the transit, because we have a lot of Uranian things happening in the world, right? That's going on.
Yeah. We do. And what I was reflecting on, before we jumped on our recording here is that, we've had a pretty dramatic Uranian presence, because we've had the square of Pluto and Uranus, and and that's like a long-term transit. Some would say that by whole sign we're still having that in a subtle way, even though it's a very wide orb, with Pluto being in Capricorn and then Uranus being in Aries. Those signs square each other. So this to me, it's like this, like you said, Mel, it's like a last hurrah of Uranus in the sign of Aries. And so, I love that it goes retrograde right before, in these last few degrees, because it's at 28 degrees. So it's like just barely out. And then it's like, oh, wait. No, we want to and to me, it's not about retrograde. I think it gets such a negative connotation. But the term retrograde, it's a time when there is an internalization. It's not necessarily a time of stopping or moving backwards. Like sometimes it can feel that way, but it is this time of integrating things. And so, I would imagine that, over the next few months that we have these opportunities to become more clear on the ways in which we have shifted and how to integrate those shifts that we've had, especially in this past year or so, so that the change becomes just a natural part of life, that it's like, oh yes, like this is who I am now and this is what I do. This is my identity and that kind of thing. So, I'm excited for that process.
Absolutely. Because it does it happens, once a year. You know, Uranus goes, retrograde for roughly about, 5 months. And this retrograde cycle is going to happen until January 2nd of, next year, which will go forward at 24 degrees Aries. And really with retrogrades, of course, it's a long process. It's 5 months that we're going to be in this cycle of sense. But the real action around, the change and movement really happens right before a planet either stations retrograde or stations direct. So, here we are leading up to it, on August 2nd or August 3rd, depending on where you are. And we're already seeing that come to play. Like, I think, I'm sure many of you know in the news, you see Trump, who's a really Uranian figure. Here he is revoking, transgender rights in the military. How Aries is that? Here we have this progression, and then we're kind of pulling that back here. And so it's things like this, because essentially we're talking about collective energies. Uranus is a collective energy along with Neptune and Pluto. So yes, it affects us individually, but really when we see these big movements, especially changes of direction in these planets, that's when you're going to see the collective and people that are prominent public figures really, showing us where these changes are being made, especially with Uranus, there. And it kind of plays out more on a world scene because it is a collective energy. So just be aware when you see these changes come up and out of the blue, things like something like that gets reversed and we're all up in like, hell no, that's not right, But this is a perfect example of that Uranus energy that is like, okay, here we're leading up to moving back. We got to think this over. It just brings things into the awareness, of ourselves personally, but mostly the planet, about aspects that have to do with that particular planet. And here we are talking about Uranus and change and revolution, and going forward into the future the best way we know how. So I find that, very interesting. So now is the time, to really, and then look at last week. Like, look at everything leading up to this moment, because that is kind of where that insight, is going to come in, I think, especially for what it is that we need to then go in and internally reflect upon. So, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think especially since we have had several transits that involved Uranus in the last few weeks, it'll be really, I think that would behoove anyone that's had especially like an interesting last few weeks to just make note, because those are themes upon which we can elaborate. And especially for, I think also, I totally agree with you, Mel, as far as seeing these things play out on the political level in the communal realm. I find that, it's kind of, striking and kind of crazy how literal things are sometimes. But so that being said, when stuff like that happens on the outside, I also think that we can take it with a grain of salt and reflect on how at a smaller scale things may be playing out in our lives individually. And especially for any of the cardinal signs too. So that would be Aries, because Uranus is in the sign of Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, because those people that are those signs, or if you have personal planets in those signs, Uranus will be either making contact or by whole sign making aspect. And so this energy of inner revolution is going to speak to you more personally, if you're within any of those signs.
Yeah. And you're going to be looking at the late degrees because we're at the end of this. So if you're like a 5-degree Cancer, maybe not so much, but it's still not, it's still going to be like that energy just squares no matter what. But if we're talking about like kind of direct hits kind of thing, you're going to, any planet from, I would say about 23, 24 degrees to even moving into that next sign, out of sign, you know, you're going to feel it as well too. And yeah, I agree with you, Shawna, as far as like it being an internal process as well as the collective. Absolutely. And I think these retrograde periods are a perfect time for us to gain a lot of insight into ourselves. You know, I would say over the next 5 months, like, you know, obviously look for inner renovation of some kind. Like, how can we renovate what's inside us for, you know, to make us more comfortable with all the changes that are happening. And chances are there might be less outward surprises, but you might get a little internal surprises, like little insights, like, or shocks that come your way, internally that kind of, cause you to stop a moment and think about, you know, the things that are coming to you now, because, you know, Uranus can spark these like moments of genius in a sense, that is just like, oh, wait, kind of never looked at it this way, you know? And those moments are what really facilitate change in our life because they bring, you know, that's what revolutionizes the inner process is because we have all these new considerations that are happening internally. And then, you know, in a sense, it's kind of a change of attitude. A little bit, you know, and especially since we're working in Aries, attitude and personality and the identity and just that, you know, me directive, in a sense. So I feel like if any of us need an attitude adjustment, which I'm sure all of us do in some area of our lives, these next, you know, 5 months are a perfect time to get our minds wrapped around that, I would say. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there could be, along with these qualities of new insights and that kind of thing, there could be an element of restlessness too. And that, the restlessness or the dissatisfaction or feeling like something's not quite, like something's missing, that can actually be a catalyst for a new insight. So that may be a quality that comes up this week, a feeling of restlessness, because of Uranus retrograde and then because of the other transits that we have happening this week too. So I would say that if you're feeling that way, like if any of our listeners are feeling like restlessness or anxiety, that is not necessarily a bad thing. Like I would explore it. I would be curious about that. Like why is this the feeling that's coming up? What's really behind it? Because sometimes that can just be something to get over the hump of moving into new territory. Yeah, right. Because we have to feel that kind of like inner static in order to make the changes that are necessary. I also kind of wanted to talk about real quick about Uranus retrograde natally, because you know, a lot of us have it. That's the thing, is it's about half a year, you know, like, so chances are, usually people that are probably born, you know, in some type of Capricorn, through, Cancer, Leo are probably going to have, that retrograde, especially recently, you know, in the last how many decades. And so, you know, what does it mean to have it natally versus someone who doesn't? And I can speak to having it natally, and I think you do too, Shawna. Don't you have Uranus retrograde? I do. Yeah. So yeah, here we're talking about this inner restlessness, and I think that a lot of people that have it already retrograde in that natal chart, kind of feel that restlessness on a more day-to-day reality. And really, we're kind of set up, for more like exciting beginnings and abrupt endings in life. If you have that, retrograde in your chart, chances are when you get those contacts, it kind of sparks these things, it's kind of more ingrained in your character in a sense, I think, when something's retrograde. And, you know, we have many changes in friendships, like people come and go in the life of the Uranus retrograde, because we learn from them, and that change is really what sparks our own internal process.
So, and monotony kills us. In a sense, it's like, but mostly I would say for anybody who has Uranus retrograde in their chart, the key thing to really focus on, or where to focus is because that Uranus energy is so future driven. A lot of times if you have it retrograde in your chart, you kind of tend to focus on the future a lot. Which sometimes if you're neglecting the present moment, then you're creating not the future that you're focusing on, but you're creating, the future based on the neglect of the now. I think even though I'm talking about natally, that is something that can be taken for this retrograde cycle as well, is to really, we have this future in the works. We got these plans in place, but really focusing on the day-to-day of now of what is, to make sure those two align, are really going to behoove us, during the next 5 months. So I just wanted to share that. And,
I love that you bring that up, Mel, because I've been getting, more and more into the habit of when I do a reading or just for myself to look at the natal placement of whatever transit is happening. And so I think this is totally influential for people that have Uranus retrograde natally in their birth chart. And then also just if a person has a prominent Uranus in their birth chart also, this could be like that energy, like you say, it's already deeply ingrained in the person. And so it's like their little Uranus spidey senses are like perked when Uranus goes retrograde. So a prominent Uranus, or being a Uranian person, would be, for example, if you have Uranus conjunct your ascendant or conjunct your midheaven or conjunct your sun, like in the same sign, or maybe it's squaring your sun or your moon, or there's lots of different possibilities, but that makes a person inherently Uranian. So they go along the spectrum of all of these things that you mentioned, Mel, like going into the future and trying to like revolutionize everything now.
Yeah.
Which can be so amazing and beautiful. But yeah, I have some dear Uranian friends, and I know that's something that they watch themselves for, is like, cause they'll have all these amazing ideas, but then it's like, okay, how do we get there?
Yeah. Right.
And this is the beauty of this 5-month retrograde period, is that we have the time to sit with it, and we have the time to let it unfold internally in our imagination.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Let's use this time wisely. Now that you know what this time is for, we can take in those considerations. So that being said, let's talk about the tarot cards, that we drew for this Uranus retrograde transit, or change and movement. And I thought it was very interesting what I ended up getting. And I think that really ties in actually to the next transit we're going to be talking about as well. But because these are kind of happening around the same time, remember, this energy is fusing together in a sense. And so one influences the other and vice versa. So the cards that I drew were the Devil as the focus and 10 of Wands as our grounding. And of course, you gotta see the Devil and you're like, what? What is this? No, nobody wants to see the Devil. Dun, 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 dun. And you don't necessarily think right away of the Devil with Uranus either, but really it's talking about how we can step into our own power and take responsibility in our lives. In a sense, and really break free from any negativity, or certain compulsions, or any type of addictions that hold us back. And addictions just don't have to be to substances. It could be to anything, really, And so tapped in with that 10 of Wands, the 10 of Wands is basically an in-between phase in a sense, where we're ending and beginning certain things. And if you look at the card, it's got a man, typically in, traditional decks where he's got 10 wands. He can't see. He's just trudging forward, right? Like doesn't see what's on the horizon. And some would say he might be overburdened a bit. But essentially we're trying to break through to what it is we desire. And we might be struggling with the actual burden that inspiration brings to us. And Uranus brings to us inspiration, especially in Aries, with that fire energy. So, like, I would say, how are you, what is ready to end at this point? Like, how can we access what is really preventing us from stepping into our own, personal passions, in a sense? That motorcycle agreed. And,
that was a sign.
That was a sign. And really just about a spiritual turnaround, how we can break certain patterns. Cause here we are talking about the devil again. And then the Ten of Wands is just pushing forward those patterns. So that's kind of how I see it as a very freeing, influence as long as we let ourselves free ourselves from the burdens that we have placed upon ourselves. But Shawna, what do you think about these cards put together?
Yeah. So full disclosure, when I first saw the devil was for this particular point, I was like, oh, holy cow. Cause the devil, to me, it is a bit ominous. And my understanding of the devil is that it's not about necessarily evilness or something being bad. It's about bondage. It's about being bound to something. And it's typically about, being bound to something that is not healthy, that it's not enlivening. Like even the picture on the card, it's the man and the woman, they're chained to this pillar. And, when I was, in the process of many years ago, when I was in the process of, trying to figure out if I wanted to go or stay in a relationship that was not healthy for me, I got really into like trying to read tarot cards, and I would go and get readings. And this is the number one card that would always come up.
Oh,
and it was then I didn't want to see it, but in retrospect, it was an indication that I was being bound to something that was not healthy. And I think that's, reinforced by the Ten of Wands, is it's like, okay, where's the burden here? Like, where's there, maybe that we're taking too much responsibility for something or trying to push something. And I think that the nature of this Uranus going retrograde is that we get to, unshackle ourselves if we choose to do so.
Right.
And that's the key part, is that, this is so important, is that the planets are never going to make us do anything. It's never going to be like, oh, Uranus is just going to take care of me and, do whatever. It's like, no, we have to decide. And so it's a good opportunity to release those binds, or to seek out the resources that you need in order to work towards that. Because I don't want to imply that letting go of something that you're bound to is easy. Often you're bound to it because, it's compelling or it's hard in some way. That's the nature of addiction. So I would encourage, any of our listeners to, like, is there something that you're bound to, and what would you benefit from releasing, and, what would that look like, or what other resources are available to you? Yes,
because they're out there. Resources are out there, and we're our own resource, like, really, because I think the devil really requires you to look deep into, what it is that holds you back. And, something's holding you back. And it's always yourself. That's the thing with the devil, is that it's always yourself. And that's really the terms that we have to come to. And that's why we have to take responsibility for our own lives, and why the devil is associated with Capricorn. And maybe that's why I'm like, the devil, whatever. I got that Capricorn moon. I'm like, I'm used to you. You're my friend.
scary.
Yes. You're not scary at all. I understand what's happening here. But it's true. You know, we try to keep certain controls over our lives, that, are no longer good for us. But just because we have those control mechanisms in place, we feel that we're safer in the bondage that we've, you know, made for ourselves. But that's not true, you know. And that's the thing, is like the devil can fool you, where days go by and you feel just fine, right? There's nothing really confronting you, but something's off. And that's the trick, is to really tap into what it is, when you realize something's kind of out of whack and you're not necessarily happy where you are, or you feel like all these outside circumstances essentially happen to you, or maybe they did when, Uranus, like Shawna was saying earlier, we just recently had some crazy Uranus transits between Mars and Sun squaring Uranus. Now we can like look at that and really see our role and start to release ourselves from this. Like the retrograde can help us get insights into these areas of where we have actively chained ourselves for whatever reason. And so that's why I think this card is coming up, because this is the period of 5 months to where we can really start to internally release ourselves from this bondage and this overburden that we may have in our lives. So yes, absolutely. So don't be scared of the devil. I mean, you know, the devil is essentially in your hands. It's not outside of you. It's within. So, you have power over that. And that's the whole point, is that you have the power. So take back the power.
Yeah, I love that, Mel, because it is like, I love the point about how sometimes you're like, oh, life is like good. Nothing's wrong, but something feels off. It like, I know for myself, and I always, like, when I let go of something, or I end something that wasn't working for me, it's only in retrospect that I'm like, damn, like that situation sucked, or that really wasn't making me happy, or that, you know, that wasn't right for me in some way. But like in the moment, it's so hard sometimes to like really put my finger on it. So I think this is that time for going inside and reviewing some of that material and being really honest with ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. So, all right, some questions to ask yourself for this Uranus stationing retrograde. I would say, you know, over the next 5 months, what can I do to document the sudden insights that are coming my way? How can I integrate my instinctual knowings to create change within? I would ask, how can I transmute restlessness into inner freedom? And lastly, I would ask, how can I use this internal electricity to spark a core revolution? So,
I love those.
Got a little food for thought, and we'd love to know what you're thinking about Uranus retrograde. So please share with us your thoughts and what you experience, because we would love to know. But that being said, we need to move on, because we got 2 major transits to talk about. This week has a lot to offer us. So let's move on to Jupiter in Libra squaring Pluto in Capricorn. And this has been on the make for quite some time here. And it's finally going exact, and it will be exact on Wednesday, August 4th at 11:29 a.m. Pacific time, which is 6:29 p.m. Universal time. And then Thursday, August 5th, 4:29 a.m. Aussie Eastern time. And that is going to happen at 17 degrees Libra and Capricorn. All right, Shawna. So give us your quote for Jupiter square Pluto, which we are deeming expanding your personal power.
So this quote is by Alice Walker, the American writer and activist. She says, "The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any." And I'm just realizing, as we were talking earlier, like, wow, yeah, all of these are really connected. So Jupiter is about expansion. It's also about, especially Jupiter in Libra as it is now, it's about social activism. It's about justice. And Jupiter is all inclusive. It wants to explore and expand everything. There's like this hunger for growth. And so Pluto, in contrast, is typically known as the Lord of the Underworld. It's about the subconscious. Pluto also has this element of hunger with it, but it's more of a hunger that's related to desire. It's a hunger for power. It's a hunger for importance. And it's a hunger for the true grittiness of life. So when these two come together, there's like huge ambition going for what it is that you want. And it can be either dominating or trying to push your own idealistic beliefs, which is more Jupiter. The whole idea behind this is that this will typically manifest in a person's life in one of two ways. Number one is that the person will feel this themselves. They'll feel like a drive to go towards something that feels really important. In contrast, if a person doesn't feel confident doing that, or they are more of a wallflower, they may experience other people being this way towards them, like dominating or pushing an ideal on them. So that's why I chose this quote in particular, is that whatever is happening this week, and especially the last few weeks, I would really look at how power dynamics are coming up, because that's the essence of this transit, is like power and how we use it and how we use it in an interconnected way.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And it's interesting that we had the devil come up, with the transit before, because these are so close to each other. These are within days apart. And like we said, with Uranus going retrograde, like these are events that are leading up. It's not like right at that time it's exact, it's all melding together. And essentially, it's really about taking our own power back in a sense, or realizing where, we might try to exert that too much, especially in certain relationships. But for me, I really feel that Libra, because Libra fights for, fairness and justice and balance in life, and can always see the two sides of the coin. Ask a Libra, who's right in a situation, and she'll tell you you're both right. Essentially. Yep. And that's the thing, because truth is essentially always half truths. And that's, the whole thing with the opposite and the opposites and duality. You can always see two sides, and essentially they're the same. And that's what brings the whole. But that being said, when you have that ability, to look at two different sides constantly, it makes it very hard to make the right decision. And I think we're at a precipice in a sense, especially with Jupiter, who's asking us to really go beyond what it is that we've known in this Libra area of our lives. And Pluto, who here we are talking about that power, stepping into your own power, which might not be easy for some people. And to really be able to make certain decisions in life, whether that has to do with something personally, depending on where Jupiter is, in Libra is in your chart, is kind of where these considerations are coming up. But I really feel that we're all at this, crossroads as a sense, and we're making choices in our lives, or we're not. And that is the key, because Libra, and the shadow side to Libra, is that it will dance around the choice as long as it possibly can. It's like, oh wait, if I don't make a choice, maybe they'll never notice that I did, and I can just live this life peacefully over here. But it isn't peace. It's not going to help anyone out, especially yourself. So I feel like, because here we are, we're talking about once again, a collective cycle, like we're talking with Uranus, where this is something big within us, but this is big within everyone. It's not like you're not alone. And this is the end internal crisis point of this transit. Essentially, Jupiter, was conjunct with Pluto at the end degrees of Sagittarius. It started this cycle in December of 2007, and in a different sign. So, we've had in 2007, we had the conjunction. The first square was in February of 2011. And then the opposition was in April of 2013. And now here we are in that final square. So you can look back at those times in your life maybe, and which might point you into the decision that you have to make at this time, which is more of an internal one. So that's kind of how I'm really, I kind of view this, this decision making, and why it might be difficult, because Pluto asks the truth of us. And are we able to make decisions in our life based on the truth, which sometimes is not as pretty as we'd like it to be? And do we have the ability to step in our own power to, have the authority, once again, we're talking about Capricorn and Pluto, our own inner authority, to make those decisions. And chances are, being in the realm of partnerships, they might be difficult, especially for someone else or in the equation. So that's kind of how I'm looking at it. But yeah, so what do you think, Shawna? Decisions.
Yeah, decisions. Well, and as we're talking about decisions, I'm reminded of the transformational effect of Pluto. A big part of this decision process is that there is something that requires renovation, because that's what Pluto is about. Pluto is like, all right, whatever you've been doing, you can't just put some new frosting on it and then be like, here's the cake. Like, you need to scrap that whole, the cake is not good anymore. You need to bake a new one. And so it's like, that kind of sucks sometimes. You're like, fuck, like I made this whole cake and it didn't come out right. But it's like, you can't just put frosting on it anymore. And I don't know, maybe the cake is a job. Maybe it's a relationship dynamic. Maybe it's the role that you have in your family. Whatever it is, like there's something that needs to be scrapped. So, and not like just thrown away, and it doesn't mean that there needs to be permanent loss, but like there's something that needs to be like, it needs to start over fresh. And I can't tell you what that will look like without having like a dialogue, but I would imagine, that it involves some kind of decision making process, and that may be a part of the challenge here, because Capricorn is like all decisive, like all kinds of like, all right, this is what we need to do. And this is why. This is useful. This is not useful. And then Libra, like you were saying, Mel, is like, well, I don't know that, maybe I could still do this. So like, I would watch out for that, like, that justifying things. Like,
yes, right. That's a good.
So it reminds me of like what a hoarder does when they hire, if you ever watch those shows, like the Hoarder Show, and they hire the consultant, and they're like, well, I could save these like 500 Tupperware lids, I can use them someday. It's like, no, don't save that shit. Like, don't make excuses.
Yeah.
So
that's funny.
Yeah.
I bet the hoarder shows, I would be willing to bet a lot of the hoarders have squares between Cancer and Libra. I would say. I bet, just that wanting to keep, but then not being able to make the decision
you
see the value of on all sides.
Sentimental cluster.
That's interesting. For sure. So and we still have this, Sun and, conjunct Mars. We're still coming off that, which happened last week, as we're talking about, but it's still very much an energy, at play. So we're at the beginning of this cycle, and we're ready to move forward. So now is the time that we're going to have to do this, essentially. And having that square, which will actually be exact, even though this is so slow building that, we put an exactitude on it, but at the same time, like, this is weeks and, years in the making, essentially, if you're following the cycle. But I do find it interesting that when it does go exact, the moon's going to be in Capricorn that day, and it's actually going to cross Pluto, at that day when we're having this, exact square, which, squares are turning points in our lives. And so I feel that with the moon being there, that, I'm hoping that we're going to be able to emotionally get on board with what Pluto's message is, because, at the end of the day, part of me, I don't know, you put Pluto into the equation and it kind of trumps a lot of things all the time, because there's something that Pluto wants from you, and it's that truth and that honesty, and you just can't get away from it. So I'm hoping that with the moon crossing over that point, that we won't necessarily totally break down, because sometimes that's an intense feeling, but I'm hoping that we really get something, emotionally out of it, which is going to lead us most likely to our next transit, which we'll talk about in a minute, in that, the lunar eclipse in Aquarius. But to touch on real quick on that Capricorn point, you know me, if you've listened to past episodes, I like to refer to Christopher Witecki's step system for degrees. And here we are having this Jupiter-Pluto square at 17 degrees, Libra and Capricorn. And in Witecki's system, he would say for 17 degrees is, I sense what I love, and so I decide. So how perfect is that for Sun and Mars in Leo? Keep in mind, this is all happening while our awareness is traveling through the sign of, what is it that I want? What do I want? What do I love? Where do I find joy? Where do I want to put my energy, that Mars, into that? And so I find that very poetic that, this essentially is pushing us to a decision based on what it is that we sense that we truly love. And there's a lot of power to that. So keep in mind, when you're feeling all these things, come back and connect with your heart. Ask your heart, what do I want? What is it that I love? What is crucial in this element to go forward? Because we don't want to go forward anymore in areas that our heart is not fully, intertwined with. Because we're not doing ourselves any justice. Libra. No justice. So yeah, ask your heart. If you are finding yourself in indecision, have a little one-on-one, with that all, our core. Cause it has the answer. So just tap in. Tap it in.
Yeah. I'm just, as I'm looking at this and you're speaking, Mel, I'm really struck by the emotional intensity of this time, with the moon being there in Capricorn with Pluto. And then that's right before the moon moves into Aquarius, for the lunar eclipse. This is a massively intense time. And I don't want to downplay that. I don't want, people to feel like they're going to feel crazy or anything. But I want to name that. I want people to know that this, to me, feels like it could be a very emotionally intense time where one maybe doesn't really know, what to do with all of the feelings that come up. And that maybe that's okay. That we don't always have to have all the answers, but we can still, like you said, Mel, we can still listen. And I think that is the key to this week is, really listening to what's going on the inside, not having all of the analytical answers necessarily, but really listening to what's true for you.
Yeah. I like that because essentially Libra is a good listener, it's like the ideal partner in a sense. And because it can listen and assess the both sides, it has that faculty. So I definitely agree with that, go in and listen. And, here we are with the moon in Capricorn, and it could be an intensely emotional time, but we're talking about the moon in Capricorn, which I speak personally. And not a lot of times you might tend to shove it down, whatever's happening right now. So just be aware if you have things coming up and you're trying to if I don't look at it, it doesn't exist. Well, I hate to tell you, it does. So So, just know that might happen at that time, especially with that moon being there. But don't get in that Capricorn rut, take a moment. There's nothing wrong with feeling your feelings when they come up, because essentially, if you're honest with them, that Plutonian honesty, you're going to get the results that you really desire, because you had that moment with yourself, and that moment is crucial, to your growth going forward. So, so big transit for sure. And I find it very interesting, the tarot cards we had for this, transit as well. Which at first I was like, and then the picture just started painting itself. So we have, for Jupiter squaring Pluto, we've got the Daughter of Cups as the focus and the Two of Wands as the grounding. And really, if I'm going to sum it up here, that's really about trusting our own decisions and our partnerships, or decisions within partnerships. Because the Daughter of Cups, that first cup energy, or Page of Cups, depending on what deck you use, there's that increasing your own self-esteem to be able to trust the feelings that come your way, in the decisions that you're making. So I find those two interesting. Shawna, what do you think about those two cards placed together?
Yeah, I'm struck by the creative power that is implied through these cards. And that makes me think of this to me, I appreciate these cards so much, because that's not something that would have jumped out at me. But, Jupiter and Pluto, there is this immense creative tension that could be felt. Jupiter in Libra itself is super creative and motivated by crafting something that is pleasing. And then Pluto is the essence of sexual creative energy. And that's what the Page of Cups reminds me of, is that there's something that's a creative, synchronistic, there's something, it's almost like a gift that's being brought either from the inside or from the outside. And then the Two of Wands is the man that's looking out onto this massive, wide open landscape. And it's, that to me also really speaks to the open possibilities that Jupiter and Pluto bring.
Yeah.
And, so these two together, I'm wow, there's a potential to create something really amazing, something, that of massive proportions that when it comes from a place that's deep inside, when it comes from a place of meaning and a place of intensity inside of a person.
Yeah. Absolutely. Because it's true. Yeah. Two of Wands. Yeah. He's looking out, and how it works in succession is here we have the Ace of Wands, where you have this beautiful inspiration, right? You were driven by this goal, and this thing comes to us. And by the time we get to the two, we are decided to go after it. Essentially it's a decision. And our heart and our heads are on board, and we've made a commitment to pursue, that, passion, or that, inspiration that comes to us. And a lot of times, because it's a two, it involves another person, someone else is part of this, and goes on board. But what I find it very interesting about that Daughter of Cups, because that's pure cup energy. Any page or daughter or princess, whatever deck you use, embodies the kind of roughness and, totality of that suit and of cups. So essentially, as the court cards progress, it's like an evolution of balancing that aspect. So when you see that first card, just know that whatever your strength is, it might be a little weakened. And your weakness might be strengthened. It's a balancing. We're trying to, balance this all out in a sense. I find it really interesting. As I was kind of looking at these cards, and I was just reading a couple different things here and there, I came across, something, that was talking about with the Daughter of Cups about heaven and earth coming together, or bringing that evolution and that balance, together. Same with the male and the female, the thing that comes in and brings this, essentially this one or this whole. And they had a quote by Confucius, which I thought was very interesting, which said, when 3 people journey together, their number decreases by 1. When 1 man journeys alone, he finds a companion. So essentially, yeah. So we're in effect that we're always becoming one with these 2 integrated parts. And we're talking about Libra and, so, and with that too there, how can we get like a harmonious state around our projects, and really, be able to adjust and open ourselves up, especially with others that we might be working on, with this shared inspiration, in a sense. And how can we receive the support? If people are offering us support, how can we receive that? Because here we are, we're talking about a square between Jupiter and Pluto. Like, chances are we might be trying to hold things out from coming into our lives, like, wait, hold on. There's something wrong here, So if you find that coming to you, ask yourself also, how good are you at receiving, that support and love that can come to you, at this time. But yeah, just, it's interesting. It's food for thought,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And one last side note with this too is especially if you are working on something that you're like, ooh, like this applies to me, it would be beneficial to look at where which houses Jupiter and Pluto are placed in your birth chart, because that's going to be extra influential. Like
absolutely.
That. And I would even think of like, oh, how can I combine these 2? Like, if you want to majorly astro geek out on it, like, if it is your 10th house and 7th house, like, how can you create partnerships and career or something of that sort? Like that would be an interesting way to really work with the energy.
Yeah, absolutely. Look up where that is in your chart. And if you don't know, that's what we're here for. So please reach out to us and we'll help you with that. But yeah, we're just Libra's just looking for some harmony. Jupiter just wants to put us there, it's ready, but it's going to take a lot of deep inner work, to kind of break free and really, and that's why I love that Daughter of Cups there, and how the daughter has issues trusting, trusting her own self and her self-esteem enough to take the risk, to put love out there or into something, or put your heart into something. And trust is really a Plutonian thing as well, to really fully trust someone means you have to be vulnerable and break down certain barriers, and have a certain level of honesty with yourself and others to have a bond of trust. So yeah, I feel that's a big factor, is trusting. So yeah.
Yeah, those 2, they go hand in hand. Trusting yourself, and then trust in others, vulnerability with the self, and then vulnerability with others, for sure.
Yes. So that being said, just a few questions to take away before we move on to an even more intriguing matter. But for Jupiter squaring Pluto, these are the questions I would ask. I would say, where in my life am I experiencing a crossroads? How can I make choices with confidence? I would ask, how can I step up and make decisions that expand my own personal power, yet are also fair to others? And then lastly, I would ask, what truth can now set me free?
Love that.
So, well, all right. Now we are moving on to last but certainly not least, and that is the full moon lunar eclipse in Aquarius. So get ready. Monday. So we're a little ahead of the game, this would technically be in next week's podcast, but hey, you gotta be in the know ahead of time, because this energy is brewing. But that lunar eclipse is going to happen on Monday, August 7th at 11:11 a.m. Pacific time. Very interesting for us Pacific time people, which is 6:11 p.m. for universal time, and then Tuesday, August 8th at 4:11 a.m. Aussie Eastern Time. And that's going to happen at 15 degrees Aquarius and Leo. So Shawna, give us the quote you have for this intense lunar eclipse.
So this quote is by one of my faves, Carl Jung, the psychotherapist and the founder of depth psychology. He says, "Whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event." And I love this quote so much. And, what's really interesting is, Carl Jung he's not the only one that's said something like this in so many words. A lot of astrologers actually put out this concept. And I know that, the astrologer Robert Hand has said it, in one of his books about transit specifically, that whatever it is that we're not comfortable with owning as a part of ourself, whether that is because we think that it's not good, or there's like some kind of repulsion with it, or we think that the quality is too good and it's too good for us to own and embody. Whatever that is, it appears outside of us because we're not comfortable owning it. And so, that is really that is so core with full moons, and that is such a core of a lunar eclipse, with the South Node in Aquarius. It's like, whatever it is that we've rejected or that we are rejecting, that has an opportunity to come up, to be illuminated for us to see. And I think that, like, how we respond to that is really going to be reflected in how it is that we experience this eclipse, because some people are going to just like feel this kind of internalization of the energy, and some people something outside dramatically may happen. So yeah, a curious time.
It is a curious time, definitely. And I think I neglected to say that we've titled this transit Release and Reset. And that is exactly essentially what this lunar eclipse, is doing. And just so you know, like lunar eclipses versus solar eclipses, with the whole lunar faculty, is that it's more subconscious than the solar. And this is the first eclipse that we're going to have before we have that total solar eclipse on the 21st. Chances are during this lunar eclipse, we're going to have subconscious material that is coming up, that is going to influence in some way the solar eclipse, which is, we're going to see that outward expression of what we are going to subconsciously feel in the lunar. We're going to see the outward with the solar. So I feel that they're very much tied in together, because when eclipses are happening, they're happening in a pair, sometimes more depending on the position of the planets, because you have to be, to have an eclipse, you have to be within 15 degrees of the moon's nodes in order for it to be considered just a normal eclipse. But that being said, because they have a cycle in what is known as a Saros cycle, the last time we had this cycle was actually, the last lunar eclipse that happened at 15 degrees Aquarius was August 8th, 1998. So depending on how old you are, Shawna and I are definitely old enough to take this into consideration. you might want to look at, if you can remember that far back, you might want to look at, how that time period was for you and what things came up, because essentially we're touching back into this cycle. And I find that very fascinating, and I'm already making some personal ties with myself, with that time period. But just know, the Saros means repetition, from the ancient Babylonians. And so we see these cycles, and we can go back and really look at these cycles and integrate them in our lives and in the life of humanity, essentially, based on these repetition of placements of being eclipsed. And what's interesting is that happens every 223 lunations. It takes 223 of these in order to arrive back and really start that over again. So I would say a really good clue into maybe some of those subconscious impulses that are coming up right now in Aquarius would be to look back at that time if you are old enough to really gain relevance from it. So I don't know, what were you doing back then, Shawna?
Yeah. So this is, I've been contemplating the themes that eclipses bring into a person's life in the cycle, like you're talking about, Mel. And so, around that time, I was about 15 and, I'm just, so these eclipses for me, they're activating my 12th house and my 6th house. So 12th house is like, inner world place where we get tripped up. And then 6th house is like health and routine and that kind of thing. And I'm remembering that, that's the time when I really got into music and I really got into, like alternative kind of grungy, like rock music. And, I remember, like, this is a total 12th house moment. This is why I shared this. So I remember being in my room and someone had given me a mixtape and it was like Tool and like Rancid and like some other bands. And I fell in love with the band Tool and
me
like,
too.
and, like, I so vividly remember like playing when we had cassettes, like recording music from like the radio or whatever on my cassette thing. And like it just being in my little, my quiet, contemplative space in my room with my music. And so I'm like, oh, like that's totally 12th house, kind of thing. That area of my life is being activated again. And so, so I don't think it'll be exactly the same at this point in my life, of course, but I was really stewing before we talked and just this week on how these themes, like they're so subtle and it's like they really take time to unfold. And so I think the more that we can understand like the actual root of what was happening at that point in time, like in this case back in 98, and then like what's actually happening now and why. Yeah. I think that even if it doesn't make sense now, over time it will be revealed.
In 18 years, you'll see the big picture.
Well, not that long,
just
but
kidding.
Like I was thinking more like over the next 6 months.
Yeah, I know. I'm just kidding. But it's true. I look back here, for me and that cycle, that lunar eclipse happened, in August of 98, but that cycle of eclipses essentially lasted from 98 to 2000. And for me, happening in that 4th and 10th area, I moved home a lot, or moved around to different houses during that time. And I was going to school for a career that I ended up not pursuing. And by the end of those eclipses, I moved, 3,500 miles away from where I was and dropped out of college, So now that I think about it, that was very influential in my life to put me to where I am today. And it's just interesting stuff. Because let's talk about eclipses in general. Obviously, have to do with some type of. It has an emphasis in some area of our life, and that emphasis is essentially bringing some type of crisis point. But the purpose of that crisis is for that release that we're talking about, that release and reset. Because if something doesn't come to that surface, here we are talking about the lunar eclipse. We're looking for subconscious material to come to the surface. So if we don't have that crisis, how can we release? So this is the time where we're going to be looking for those areas that come up, that bubbling subconscious material, in the area of the chart. Hopefully you'll be able to look at certain, house placements that Shawna was talking about earlier. And just see how that really relates with these Aquarian ideas, because, that Aquarius energy, is tapping into the subconscious stuff that could come up right now. Could be around our own individual freedom or not wanting to conform to certain things and really go our own path. And really the loyalty to truth because, once again, another truth sayer is definitely the Aquarius, and will say what it thinks with, no qualms whatsoever, and will stand within that truth. So we have to take these things into consideration, and especially with that shadow side is, Aquarius can be very stubborn. And we have, that's very important, which I think Shawna and I should talk about in a second, is the fact that, Sun and Mars is still conjunct and within a decent orb. And Mars is really playing in to this, lunar eclipse. And we know what a Mars opposition will do, right? Can we, there's chances are there's going to be some conflict, in the area of, where this eclipse hits for you. There's something is going to challenge that. For your own awareness, because here we are with that Sun in Leo, So how do you think Mars really plays into this?
Yeah, I like the word that you use, challenge, because Mars is the epitome of there is some type of conflict. It's not a matter of like, if there's a conflict, it's like, yes, there's a conflict. And conflict doesn't have to be bad. But I'll tell you what, like this is, if the feeling tone is around, unconscious emotional things coming up, like these things where we react versus respond. If all of that stuff is bubbling up, which is the full moon aspect and the eclipse, and then Mars is in there. Mars is like, all right, we need to choose sides, and you're either with me or you're against me, and I'm going to be assertive on whatever point that I'm making. Like, there's going to be conflict. And, I think that's something to keep in mind, that it doesn't have to be bad. I wouldn't take things personally this week. I would keep in mind that if someone is like coming at you, that's more about them than about you. And I think the more that we can rely heavily on our practices of self-care, practices of slowing down, that's really going to be helpful this week. Because this is like stuff like unconscious material is coming up, and then we're going to have to like talk about it, or, it's almost like it like gives me this image of when you know someone very well, so they kind of like know your trigger buttons. They know how to push your buttons. It's like they're going to be pushing the buttons. And that doesn't mean that it's from a place of maliciousness. It's more just like this is an opportunity to see things that need to come up, so that they can be transmuted, so that there can be this big reset button, so to speak, with things that are just not healthy patterns anymore. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. And we need that challenge in a sense to get us there. And that's what I love about Aquarius, and coming back to that whole truthfulness, and standing in your own, individual space and honoring the truth of who you are despite the circumstance. Cause that's essentially what Aquarius is. And then when they compromise that's when they end up being alienated or in a life that is not of their suit because, they didn't go against the grain. So keep in mind, there's still that element there. And I think with the Sun in Leo in opposition, especially with Mars there, like maybe maybe expression is needed. Maybe the ego needs to be sufficiently developed enough to honor what these Aquarian emotional needs that are being eclipsed, right now. Because Leo is a kind of personal, it's all about me. It's a personal place. So it's just interesting to see how those two can really, tie into one another. Especially since, we have some other aspects coming in, because we're still, we have, Jupiter that is actually going to be talking harmoniously, to to both of these, Jupiter's right there, giving a sextile to the moon and a trine to the sun. So all those issues that just came up with that square, with Pluto are now in a more easygoing, aspect with this, lunar eclipse, which I find interesting to see how that will all kind of tie in, since, they're kind of playing nice or easy. Like I'm assuming, cause here we are, this is a conjunct the North Node and the South Node. Like that's what makes an eclipse. So essentially, we're talking about growth, no matter how you slice it. And that's essentially what's going on here. This is a big growth week for all, I would say.
Yeah. And, I was thinking about how the Mars being in the mix may actually, cause we were talking about indecision earlier with Jupiter and Pluto. And I was just thinking now, the eclipse and Mars being with the eclipse, there is this sense of being confronted with something. And so, it may assist with whatever, indecision that we're having this week too. It may, clearly indecision to me, at least it doesn't seem like it's an option at this point in time. There may be a pushing towards making a decision or pushing towards confronting something. So I think that may actually be helpful. Again, helpful versus pleasant. I don't know that those are going to go together. I do want to mention that just the whole month of August, really, whenever there's eclipses, things always feel a bit unstable. And I'm already hearing people talk about feeling this way as the eclipse as we build towards the eclipses. And, it's okay to feel that way. I know it's not pleasant, but it kind of goes with the territory of change and the territory of growth and evolution, like you were talking about, Mel. There is going to be growth, and, growth is scary and uncomfortable, and it does feel unstable. So, if people are feeling unstable, I wouldn't take that as a sign that something's wrong. I would take that as a sign that there's growth, and that's actually a good thing.
Yes. Just sometimes it might be a little uncomfortable, but that's okay, because it's going to get us to a state that's even more comfortable than what we thought was comfortable. So that's important. But that being said, let's move into our tarot cards, for this, full moon lunar eclipse in Aquarius. And I find it very interesting that I got the 5 of Swords as the focus, and the Lovers, once again, as the grounding. Now, Lovers keeps showing up. It's been showing it up for the last 3 weeks, and I think that really plays in, with a lot to do with, actually this Jupiter-Pluto square. Personally, but the number one thing I would say is be sure to choose your battles wisely. This is the time where you want to be very wise about how you use your assertion. Because like Shawna was just saying earlier with Mars there, it kind of might, prompt us to make that, decision or assertion in some way. And there's a chance that maybe we've already made that. And now because it's in opposition, someone is challenging that decision we've made, It's possible as well. So just know, the 5s, any 5 is going to bring change. And here, it has to do with swords have to do with the mind and thinking patterns and how we use our power and our intellectual, power mostly. And this card, the 5 of Swords is known as the Lord of Defeat. And that doesn't sound so great, right? But that's the thing is, you have to suss out what defeat actually is and when you honor that and when you fight for it. So with the 5 there, cause obviously the Lovers is about us making these choices in life based on what it is we're attracted to. And a lot of times that has to do with partnerships, cause we have that 2 energy with the 2 people. But here we bring in the 5 of Swords in the mix. And there's a couple ways this can go down. It's you might have decisions that you want to make now, right? But they're made hastily. in a little illogically, and irrationally. And that can affect your relationships and your overall environment if you just, fly off the cuff and start flapping your lips towards something that has repercussions in the end. Like, you have to be careful about what it is that you're asserting right now, especially intellectually and verbally, because Aquarius is quick on the dime when it comes to intellectual matters. Like, there's a retort out of every Aquarius, no problem. So that energy at play, the intellectual wits and the battles are up. But this is also the thing is if you're facing a real problem, you need to have your wits about you in a sense. Like, sometimes you have to act and speak your truth, even though it's obviously going to go against someone else's, what it is they're saying. And use your, like, don't do it like lowbrow, where, you can tell it like it is, but you have to do so with respect. Like, that's where the wit comes in, as to how you intellectualize the conflicting viewpoint you might be sharing. So yeah, I'd stay away from any insults, because this is a card that can bring up all the, like, nasty things that you've wanted to say, and just be a little, have some tact there. But Shawna, how do you see these two coming into play for this eclipse?
Yeah, so I'm really struck by the Five of Swords being this theme of, like, even if you think that you win, if you make a compromise on integrity, you're not really winning.
Yeah.
And so, that's just some food for thought, because that to me is what really jumps out with this card is, that the need for integrity with whatever battle it is that you're fighting, or whatever it is that you're moving towards, or relationships, even with the Lover's card. There is this need to, to not necessarily focus on the end game, but to focus on maintaining integrity and presence now. Because if you cut, like, the Five of Swords, it makes me think about, like, cutting corners, and it makes me think about winning at all costs, or what's that phrase, like, do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy?
Right.
And I'm not saying, I'm not saying, like, don't call people out when they need to be called out, or don't stand up for what's right. But, it is a fine line. Like, especially calling people out on their stuff. Like, sometimes that's appropriate, and sometimes it actually does more damage, and sometimes it does irreversible damage. So, I would really check, especially if it's a conflict or something that we're pushing for this week, especially, like, with all of these transits. This whole week is, if we're pushing for something, it's beneficial to look at what is the motivation and where is this push coming from? Like, is it coming from a desire to be right and to get to the end and to, like, steamroll someone? Or is it coming from, like, this calm place of integrity? Like, that's what really comes up for me with these cards.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I love the integrity of what it is that you're fighting for, essentially, like, you can't really shortcut that, in a sense. And, and I find it interesting because it can be, that's the thing is, it could be, chances are this could be without, outside of you, but this could also be an internal battle where our minds are going back and forth and having our own, I don't know how many of you out there, I know I'm guilty of it. I'll have a straight up argument in my head between two like I'll even put like fictional people in there, and I'm like just having my own battle. I'm like, what am I doing? Like, what is going on here? But just know that you could be facing a real problem at this time, in a sense. And we're talking about decisions with that, Lover's card and choosing, you know, between things. And so if you're facing some type of problem, you know, you do have to keep your wits about you and beware of self-destruction, in the decisions that you make, like Shawna was talking about earlier. There's a real self-destruction tendency here mentally. So we just got to make sure that we're constructive and not destructive, because yes, sometimes you have to express, you know, say your piece, because that's what is right. And then other times you might just have to like not, because sometimes, you know, you have that, especially if you're dealing with someone outside of you, like sometimes you'll find yourself in a battle where, you know, if say you're a 100-pound guy that's, you know, 5'5", and you come up across a guy that's 6'2", 220, you gonna fight that fight? No. The smart thing to do is to walk away. But how many of you out there probably see that little guy like, put him up, I'm ready, you know? And that's a perfect example of the Five of Swords. Like, dude, you didn't think this through, you know? You clearly are, well, you know. So just know that's kind of why this card ties into choosing your battles wisely. Like, yeah, I'm using an outside influence of, you know, a typical fight or something, which is probably not going to be the case for, that many people. But that's essentially what's happening, you know, like, that's how you got to choose, what it is you fight for and how you can use your wits to do so, or be smart enough to know when to walk away. So that's kind of, yeah.
Yeah. And another example is I had someone close to me that's having a conflict with a family member. And long story short, she basically called this person out on some unconscious behaviors, and it kind of backfired because the person got pissed and was like, how dare you? Like, so even though my friend was right in pointing out the behaviors, that it didn't create a resolution. It actually poured more gasoline on the fire, so to speak. Yeah. So like that is something I could totally see, as a possibility, like where you really want to like call someone out for what they're actually doing. And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. People who are doing something unconsciously typically don't respond well to being called out on it. Yeah. You know, in a combative way. So the more that we can like, approach it in a way that involves empathy, you know, of course, without being a doormat, but like having boundaries and empathy can be a more skillful pathway to handling something of that sort.
Yes, because, you know, let's not forget, Mars is in the mix. Yeah. So just keep aware. But there's a lot that we can gain from this cycle, and there's a lot that we can release. So that being said, in the interest of not making this the longest podcast ever made, we are going to go on to the question portion of this lunar eclipse in Aquarius. So the questions that I would ask myself for this lunar eclipse would be, what subconscious feelings are making their way to the surface? How can I release and reset this previously hidden energy? I would ask, am I fighting the current? How can I express myself without becoming alienated? And then lastly, I would ask, how can I convey my truth and tell it like it is while keeping my wits about me? How can I respond with what's necessary without all the drama? So that's where I leave you with the eclipse. So Shawna, what have we learned this week? Oh my goodness. So many things. Well, we've learned that Uranus is stationing retrograde, and we're having inner revolutions of sorts for the next 5 months. We've learned that Jupiter is making its final square with Pluto, where we're expanding our personal power. And then we've learned that we're having a full moon lunar eclipse in Aquarius, where we have the chance to release and reset. So, Shawna, I'm sure you have some excellent action items for us this week, this potent week. Please share those with us.
Yeah. So, major, most important action item for this week is to do something physically active. So, that can be going for a run, going for a walk, doing some yoga, some tai chi, whatever you want to do. Do something to like work up a sweat this week. And I'm prescribing that because this is a lot of dynamic energy. And the more that your body is like, right, like the more that there's not all of this bound up physical tension, the more relaxed you'll feel during this week. And, it'll allow for more skillful responding. So that's the biggest thing that I would suggest. And, if you want to, get involved and, keep yourself accountable, take a picture of whatever it is that you're choosing, to do, post it on Instagram and tag us. We always love hearing from you guys and how you implement the action items and the guidance that we give for the transit. So, let us know what you're doing. Again, it can be like a run or a walk or, anything to get you feeling really good in your body this week.
Yes, we would love to see what you're doing to get active and get that energy to release itself. And yeah, just tag us. You can find me at Energetic Principles, and you can find Shawna at Neo Feminine Astrology. So please share with us. So yeah, this is going to be, yeah. So I can't wait to see what this week brings. And just my Scorpio nature is ready for anything. And I think that, regardless of all the changes we are all going through, no one's getting out of this. We're all going to be in a better place after this August, reworking of sorts. So just to reiterate, Shawna and I are here for you. We want to reach out to us. And we would love for you to contact us if you wanted to find out more about your own chart, and get a reading. That's what we're here for. So to find me, you can find me at energeticprinciples.com. You can find me at Energetic Principles on Instagram and Facebook. And I'm also on YouTube, as Energetic Principles, where I have released, the horoscopes, monthly horoscopes for each sign in the rising this month. So you can go check those out. And you can see what your transits have in store, and also some tarot cards that can lead you and guide you this month. So Shawna, where can they find you?
You can find me at neofeminine.com, and then also on Instagram under Neo Feminine Astrology.
Yes. And so we are both out there every day providing Instagram food for thought, so come check it out. It's always fun. We like watching each other's stuff, so we hope that you'll enjoy it as well. So that being said, yeah, what a great episode. I'm so excited for this one, and I look forward to us talking about the solar eclipse in some future episodes. So I'm definitely wishing everyone a lot of love and light this week. How about you, Shawna? Any last words? I know you're always wishing love as well.
Yeah, lots of love. And I'm sending wishes for everyone to have as much strength and resilience as possible during this week of lots of changes. And then also, I wanted to share too, if you got something out of this podcast, if you like listening to us every week, please leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. That really helps us out. That helps to get the word out and to help more people find us as well. And if you haven't already done so, make sure that you subscribe so that you get these episodes every single week.
Yes, because they are like clockwork. We're on it, and we're ready to share with you what's going on in the astro. Yep. So, all right. Well, we hope that you reach out to us this week and share with us what all this is bringing to you. And thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time, may the stars be with you.
Namaste.